next panel is a business in turmoil, adapting in constant flux, moderated by Yasmin Abdul Al. Yes, Yasmin Abdul Al is a dear friend and basically the entertainment lawyer for half of this room, including MPAC. So thank you, Yasmin. We love you. This is a dream come true that you're here. You were supposed to be here last year, but now you're here. God bless you. Here you go. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Sue. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you again. I know, just to echo everybody, thank you to the Muslim House, brought to you by the MPAC Hollywood Bureau and Doris Duke Foundation. This is such a big deal that we're here, and I just want to continue to emphasize that and the work that it took to get here, and all the beautiful people behind us. So thank you. A round of applause for all of you. So this space is really just about these candid and thoughtful conversations, but also a conversation that's rooted in hope in the midst of instability as well. So it's a real privilege for me to be here with these beautiful and generous and brilliant panelists today. Come on, join me up here, please. Come on. We got Keisha Center, Atif Malik, Tahmina Jaffer, and Anthony Sparks. The title of this panel, like Sue said, is The Business in Turmoil, Adapting in Constant Flux. But what we're really here to explore is not just how we survive this moment, but how we build within it. And these panelists are going to help us talk about that. So rather than framing this conversation around fear and loss, my hope is that we can talk about the hopefulness. And honestly, what's changing? Where are the opportunities emerging? Especially for storytellers and leaders who have historically been pushed to the margins. So let's get right into it. I'll sit in a second. All right, so I'd love for us each to start by introducing yourselves briefly. Tell us where you're standing from or sitting from this perspective in this conversation right now. And then tell us what most feels different from like 5 years ago. 5 years ago, if we all kind of put back our bodies, post-COVID, the George Floyd wake-up call, labor strikes, global pressures, political climate, and what has changed since then and what we're having to deal with. So please start us off, Anthony.
All right, I'm first. Hey. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Anthony Sparks. A pleasure. Thank you for having me, Impact. Just really happy to be here. I am a television writer, producer, and showrunner. I was counting before this in my 22nd or 23rd year as a TV writer. Have survived along, and then about 12 years before that as an actor. So that's me in terms of what I do. So I will be, sort of speaking from the lens of a showrunner and a creator. I also consider myself an artist scholar who has trained in cultural studies and ethnicity to be able to sort of speak, from a little bit of a larger landscape as well, and sort of situating where we are in this moment. And so to answer your question, right, what's different 5 years from now? The thing that is different from 5 years ago, in a nutshell, is a pervasive sense of fear that is always present in the entertainment industry, but is like on 11 now, as they might say. And you feel it on both sides of the table. And so there's a sense of, it's fear, but it's fear that's also specifically tied to where we are politically in this country right now. It's pretty apparent that that's what it is. As opposed to before it being a fear of, if I make the wrong decision, I'm going to lose my job. It's that, but it's connected now to this moment that we find ourselves in this country. And so I would say that the connection between American politics and American cultural production in TV and film it's always a strong connection. It is a blatant connection now that is feeding that fear. So that's sort of, where I'll leave it for now.
Thank you, Anthony. Keisha.
Thank you for having me. To Sue, I just saw her pop in, but thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure and it's an honor to be here with this great panel. I'm Keisha Center. I am the SVP of Culture and Impact at Monkeypaw Productions. I'm based in LA. And the lens I'll come through is being in LA, being in a production company, but I'm fluent in a couple of languages. I cut my teeth in politics. I started with Chuck Schumer, fresh out of grad school, and worked with President Clinton and at the Clinton Foundation, and started a number of programs around social impact for him, and the Center for American Progress in DC, where I thought the worst thing that we were doing was, mobilizing young people on college campuses against President Bush. It got worse, right? And so, and then also coming from philanthropy, so it's just an honor to be here and seeing that the Doris Duke Foundation is one that is sponsoring this. I was at the Rockefeller Foundation, and now I'm firmly planted in entertainment. So I come from all those point of views, and I think that listening to the conversations that we've been having today, that intersection, and I think that I sit at that intersection and be thinking about how entertainment and how where I am can really drive those strategic partnerships across politics where we are, which affects everything, and philanthropy that should be using those resources for good, to partner with us and fund voices and fund entertainers, and then entertainment, which we have such a responsibility because we have such a big megaphone. And to answer your question, 5 years ago, so interesting. I started at Monkeypaw 5 years ago. We had this movie coming out, Candyman. And rightfully, which I'm just honored, and it's such a pleasure and a privilege to be at a company that allowed for me to create the Culture and Impact Division. It didn't exist before that. And so that one of our mandates is really we have our fingers on the pulse of what's happening. We are creators that are in touch, and we live and breathe, and we know as a company lives and breathes and understand what the climate of the content we're making. And then with Candyman coming out, and I'm spoiling it for anyone that hasn't seen it, and I think I've said it 3 times. Don't let me say it 5. I don't know what's going to happen if that happens. But what we saw was the protagonist was killed by the police, and the movie hadn't come out yet, but we'd spent all that money and it had to come out. And they rightfully were like, let's bring in, how do we release this? How do we team up with the marketing at Universal, and such a powerful, great marketing team with Dwight Keynes and that team, to think about impact-driven ways to release this film, but release it with integrity and release it in the climate that we're in right now, that it needed to come out. The protagonist, Yaya, was killed by the police, right? And so we created very fantastic, and which I believe, which we still point to, impact campaigns to release the film, to release it with wrapping our arms around our audiences and thinking about ways to not create more trauma, because we were all trapped in our houses living in trauma. So to your point, there was a fear in 2020 that I felt every single day as we sat trapped in our houses. And I still think of, if we're watching our TVs right now, we were watching yesterday, what's happening throughout this country. We're still living in a fear, and our industry is in flux. And so as someone that I'm tipping my hat to you, 23 years in entertainment, but I've been in this industry now for about 10 years, firmly planted in it, but always reaching across in politics and philanthropy to be a partner with the entertainment industry. It is different, and people are scared, and it is scary to lose your job, and so it's a different type of fear. I felt a fear 5 years ago, but you feel another fear that does feel like they've turned up the heater. One thing I did say 5 years ago, I was like, it felt great. Everyone was DEI, everyone was doing, they had on their kente cloths and they were kneeling in the tundra. You were like, what's happening? They're in the Capitol. It was this thing that I felt like wasn't there to last. So I was like, what can we create? What pathways we could create in that? And we started to see that trickle, which we'll talk more of, the rolling back, all of those things that have really, to me, created even more fear and uncertainty. But I think that where we are now is what you said, Yasmin, is an opportunity in this squeeze to create change and to look at collective powers to drive change. And so that's what I'm hopeful and excited about, that this fear won't hold us and keep us prisoners and not moving, but it will create some sort of way that we drive change, and we create something birth out of that that's excellent.
Thank you, Keisha. Atif.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Atif Malik. I'm a day and a half into Sundance, and I sound like Lego Batman. I'm losing my voice. I'm an independent producer, have been for about going on 15 years. yeah, truly independent, raised money independently, made movies independently, and then brought them to festivals, sold them. So that's kind of my lens, and I'm very much look through everything from a business perspective. And to answer your question, I think thinking about the last 5 years, distribution is a big one. Us being at Sundance right now, I think, prior to the pandemic, prior to the strikes, if you made a movie sub 5 million and brought it to a festival, and you were fortunate enough to get offers for distribution, chances are, if the movie was good, they were high six figures, maybe even seven. And I find that, it makes sense. I think, the studios and distributors suffered a lot during the pandemic and through the strikes and all of that. But, the minimum guarantees now are less than half, and it's terrible. And so, as a producer who has a duty to investors, and thinking about the long term of making movies to do well, to also make more movies, again, how do you go back to investors and say, hey, we're not even gonna break even, selling the movie, but we're handing the movie off to these distributors for 15 to 20 years. So, that's kind of the puzzle that we're trying to figure out. But I feel hopeful in that I think I see the business becoming more and more democratized, and now we do have, as creators, a clear path to reach audiences directly. So it'll be fascinating to see kind of what happens in the next 5 years.
Thank you, Atif. Tamina, please.
Hi, I'm Tamina Jaffer. I work at Disney. I'm the head of business affairs at Disney Branded Television. DBT, as we call it, is focused on kids and family content. And I've been in the business, I hesitate to say it because it will reveal my age, but over 20 years now. And I've spent time at other studios. All my time has been at studios, NBC Universal, Netflix. And then I did spend a little time at Anonymous Content before this time at Disney. And in terms of what I do, just briefly, in case probably a lot of people know what Business Affairs does, but we are handling what we call the above-the-line deals, which is the actors, writers, producers, directors. We're doing those deals for all the people on our shows. So that's the main part of my job. Look, I think 5 years ago, we had gone in knowing, for me, what feels very different. We went in kind of knowing streaming, it's the present, it's the future, like this is where we're headed. But then with COVID, it just sort of accelerated that so much. And I don't necessarily think that was a bad thing, but it just has changed audience behavior so much, because now I think people got very used to consuming content when they wanted, how they wanted, how much of it they wanted. So it's just there, there's just been a lot of adapting to that. It wasn't that way before. It was just, you turned on the television and you saw, oh, Friends is on. Okay, let me watch Friends right now. Or I'm going to go to the movie theater and it's playing at 8 p.m. So that kind of thing has changed a lot. It doesn't mean that those other forms are gone. I really don't think they are. But it's just, meeting the consumer where the consumer is at. There's so many ways now to do that, and that's the thing we're constantly thinking about in my world.
Absolutely, and kind of to segue from that, we're all finding this end of this old playbook. Things are happening differently. Things are being assumed differently. So from your perspective, Anthony, what of those long-standing assumptions on how this industry works, whether from financing or greenlighting or development, what has quietly collapsed and what is replacing that old playbook now from a showrunner perspective?
Yeah, I think ultimately we're still in flux. One of the things from a greenlighting and development perspective is that there is no finite calendar to development and therefore shows even being greenlit anymore. What that means is that development can stretch on and on and on and on and on, because we are no longer in a world, and haven't been for some time, where you've got to put 10 shows up on the air come third week of September. okay? We're not in that world anymore. Even on streaming services that are regularly trying to roll out multiple seasons of a show, you know, it debuted in February. This year is going to debut the second season 2.5 years from now in August. It's, you know, and it's, so that collapsing of urgency to greenlight means that fear has more space to come in and just slow things down to the point where it becomes difficult, actually, even in success, to make a living. Actually, you know, there's this very funny, post that somebody did, and they were like, "What is it like to be a regular on a TV show today?" And it was somebody at a doorway talking to a fan, and then handing that fan their Uber Eats delivery. Okay, and they were a regular on a TV show, and that sounds pretty dire. And I do think that there does appear to be sort of the gig-ification of every aspect of our industry right now, which I don't think is ultimately going to serve the industry, that even if you were one of the lucky few who managed to sell that show, get that show on the air, have multiple seasons, be an actor in multiple seasons of a show, the image of what that success looks like is changing. Don't know how sustainable it is just for that to be your bread and butter. That sounds really horrible. Is there any opportunity in that, or is there a silver lining? Well, I take comfort in this. First of all, in terms of the fear part and the fight for representation and the fight for those of us who are marginalized historically and currently, this fight didn't start 5 years ago, is what I tell myself on a good day. You know, the NAACP back in 1915, you know, with the birth of a nation, you know, the media and art space has always, it's such an interesting thing, because as kids, if you get hit by the bug when you're a kid, it's all jazz hands, and I feel the bug, and I get attention, and this feels good. And that's what makes many of us enter into this space, but it doesn't sustain you. And then you realize entertainment space is just a proxy for a fight for representation and for whose stories matter, right? And so, and do we get to tell our stories? And as human beings, we clearly just have in our DNA the need to tell our stories. And so I take some comfort in that's not going away. That will never go away as long as we breathe air on this earth. The need to tell stories and a way to get them out there. The ways in which they are getting out there, that may be in flux. What is the conversation about film and TV remaining the center of our pop culture and driving our pop culture? I think that is a conversation, you know. I don't think any of us want to stand by and watch film and become niche. You know, and there is a fear of all of that. But I do take some comfort in the fact that we are part of a long continuum of people and artists and producers who are fighting to tell our stories like we always have had to fight to tell our stories. And I think what happened was we had a moment, and we didn't know if it was a moment or a movement. We had a moment 5 years, 6 years ago that felt like the doors are opening. And in retrospect, we should have expected some sort of pushback from that. It was facilitated, you know, more by the conditions of the world, the COVID and the strikes and all of that other stuff. But so I'm choosing to see that I'm not going anywhere. I don't know many other very committed artists who are going to just say, I'm not going to tell my stories. But it is pushing on us to be perhaps more entrepreneurial, perhaps more creative, to do what we've always done, certainly in the African American tradition, is create something from nothing. I'm not saying it's right that we have to do that, but I'm starting to see, since I'm 20 plus years in, I hope to have another 20 years, that I am part of I'm carrying the baton as far as I can in my own little way. And so, and that baton carrying the fight to do that will continue beyond me, as well. I think something you said, and then I'll be quiet and pass the mic. You said something about sort of the power in finding sort of collective power, and sort of that, and realizing that we're all in this to a certain degree together. Look, whenever I have a down moment, and I promise I'll stop talking, I have at times had, I've had blessed with a successful career, but I've, like anybody else, have had my ebbs and flows. And I remember at one point during the ebb period, literally praying, if I'm not supposed to do this anymore, take the desire away. I don't want to keep. And the answer for me, for better or for worse, is whenever I get to that point where I feel like I've had enough of this, take the desire away. The answer for me is I wake up with new ideas. I'm like, really? And so, so I offer that, as, a little bit as like, the urge, as long as the urge to tell the story is there, I feel like we're supposed to fight to tell the story.
Yeah, and may we always be strengthened to tell that story and to keep that fight alive and to hold our hands back, to take the baton and pass it on to the next person. So Tahmina, from a platform and studio perspective, what is your take on the longstanding assumptions that have quietly collapsed, and what is replacing them from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it goes back to some of what I was talking about before, and it's something we're looking at all the time. How our consumers are actually consuming content in the kids' space. The content that I work on is often the first entry point for kids to Disney. And so how are they actually going to get to it? And what we've seen now is, parents will turn on Disney Channel or Disney Plus or whatever, but then kids will also be on YouTube, of course, right? And so it's not what do we do about YouTube? It's no, let's get our Disney content there so that we can introduce it at any, wherever our kids are going. And I think one of the things that's definitely, exciting and changing for us is we are looking a lot more at short form content, just because that is something that our kids, and not just kids, even, I see it in my own self. where I'm like scrolling or whatever, I do the same type of thing. Somehow I'm also, wanting that, quick video or whatever clip. And so, adapting to that and figuring out, okay, in my line of work, I'm making a deal for a series, but then I'm also knowing like, we're probably going to want some shorts on that too. So that we're going to need that as well. What does that deal look like? For me, it's been a great opportunity for more creativity in the deal making and just, thinking ahead and not, even if somebody says, oh, well, we're just doing this movie, we're not going to need much besides that, just this movie, and then knowing, no, you're going to want shorts. I know you are, or whatever. So just kind of thinking ahead and knowing that our fan base, our consumers, they want the content everywhere. They may not come initially to Disney Plus, or they may not go to YouTube, or whatever it is, and just thinking about that from the consumer perspective, and then what we should create for them.
Wonderful, thank you. And then with that end of that old playbook, I think comes also a shift in risk tolerance and power dynamics and decision making. Right, and so maybe Atif and Keisha, you can speak to that based on your own recent work. How have you seen risk tolerance and leverage shift? Maybe some concrete examples, or and Keisha, potentially from a cultural strategy, impact-based leadership perspective, and you, Atif, from a producer perspective.
Yeah, I would say, at least at the studio level, the risk has, I would say, been pushed down to us. Like, I think 5 years ago or pre-pandemic, the studios, I think, were willing to develop more internally and take more risk on original stuff. But now I feel like that's kind of been pushed down to us, and we have to sort of do the heavy lifting of developing and finding development money and really packaging as well, and basically bringing them as sure of an original thing as we can for them to just write it off anyway. But I think in terms of leverage, what has happened is I think we have access to unique IP, and IP is beyond just comic books and the things we sort of hear about all the time. I think true stories are IP. Culturally specific narratives are IP as well, and I think if you can really find, nurture, and develop those stories, and those aren't things that can be re-engineered, by the system, right? And they come from a specific place, and I have found success with sort of focusing on those things. Yeah.
Go ahead, Keisha.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I do see the risk being pushed down a little bit on the creators more. And then one of the things that, with that in the position from the lens I sit in, is looking at knowing that that's something for a studio to do, that they're interested in our partners, because we partner with Universal, and what we ended up doing was creating a program called No Drama. And one of the things is knowing that we want to create these pipelines. We want to create pipelines and identify ways that we can bring in IP that is out there, that there are people who are looking for opportunities to come in. And so that's what they want to know. They want to have sure understanding of who these creators are. They want to take the ability to know that their stories make sense and that their stories are commercial or marketing. So what we did with No Drama is looking at how do we create these pathways, knowing that. And they trust Monkeypaw, they trust Jordan Peele, they take that. And so we looked at the strategic partnership that we did with Universal and TIFF, and it was a short program to do proof of concept. And it's a proof of concept where we have 4,000, opened it up for 4 weeks, we had 4,000 applications that came in. And of those 4,000 applications, we picked 5 filmmakers. And that was a very scary thing for Universal, to be able to work with these 5 filmmakers that we've never met, that they've never been introduced into the industry. And while I think that knowing that risk, it created a strong opportunity, because now they have they know them, they've seen their work, they have this proof of concept that they can come into. We gave them $50,000. They gave them $50,000. We also looked through the lens of how does it, here at Sundance, we were at TIFF, how do we take this proof of concept to them and show it and present it and have it have a global access and opportunity. And with that, from there, we've seen that we gave one of those filmmakers the opportunity to create we're in conversation about creating a feature. And so that strategic partnership leveled some sort of trust in Monkeypaw. It introduced new IP that can come in. I think that's not the risk of looking at creators to think them as risk. I really try to shift that as like, these are IP opportunities, and there's new things that we can do. And so with that, all of those 5 filmmakers, their films have gotten into South by, they've gotten into Fantasia, they have gotten into Martha's Vineyard. I know we're at Sundance, but it was too late and they couldn't apply. But so it would have, but it was just too late. They missed it. But to me now, I see our partners meeting with them, setting up meetings to figure out what their ideas are. They've met the development executives are like, we've met new people who would have never had the opportunity to come into. They would have never met an engine this big. And with that, they learned from a production company. This is the first time these filmmakers had ever worked with a production company. Most of them are independent. They've been raising money on their own. When we took them through development, which you're right, has shrunken and tighter, it was a moment where they were like, how do I take notes? What do you mean? How do we engage in this? But they understand at the end of the day, it ended up creating a better product. Now they understand the studio system. They understand that relationship. And the other thing that I think that was extremely interesting for me is that we were able to, because Universal and TIFF and Monkeypaw had taken the first level of risk to create these films, we had Company 3, we had mathematics, we had VFX companies, we had Sony, other companies come in and give them free access and in-kind, that their films were probably upwards of hundreds of $1,000s that did on film. And so now we see them, we're gonna do no drama again, but everyone's in. Everyone's in because that proof of concept, it was scary. It was a new program that took 4 years. It took 4 years of creating and development, but it was some would call it a risk. I saw it as an opportunity. I see it as an opportunity for new IP. I see it as an opportunity for new filmmakers to come into the industry and be trusted and now have access and pathways into to studios. And what I think is the responsibility for me as an executive to sit there is to continue to ideate and think of opportunities like that in the space that we're in. Think of things that will that we can shepherd some of the risk for the studio, that they can use their dollars in impactful ways to be able to drive more pathways into the industry.
Yeah, and it seems like you have absorbed that risk so that they can feel freer in that trust and that patience and that process and really just get to do what they love to do the most. So thank you for that. If we move to a little bit more about this trust and risk and all this stuff, there's these sort of less visible forces like brand sensitivity and political pressures and overall climate and market pressures that are there, whether we see them and talk about them or not. And those things, those are less visible forces, are shaping content decisions, again, whether we like it or not. And how do you see that playing out in underrepresented communities, Anthony, and even when it's not outright? And how do you navigate still protecting authors in the midst?
Yes, this is where, I have learned, sometimes the hard way, that part of my job, it shouldn't be, but part of my job when I'm creating and developing a show as a African American male who usually has partners maybe who are also African American, but often are white folks, I now have to turn into a Jedi mind reader. What are you really saying to me? That you cannot say in a way that would get you in trouble or make you feel bad or you think piss me off to the point of no return. But I know that you're giving me a note based on these invisible forces that have very real consequences for what can happen in the development process. And I used to get, and I do still sometimes get angry about that. I used to get even angrier. And now I'm just trying to keep my eye on the goal. Is there anything that they're saying to me that is going to be helpful to me? Not because this is cool what they're saying, but it's their read on what's happening in the rooms where I'm being talked about, but I'm not present, or my idea or my work is being considered, but I'm not there to be able to advocate for it personally. So what I try to do, and sometimes when I'm mentoring newer writers and creators, some of them are more open to it, some of them are not, which is what is absolutely necessary for you to tell this story with integrity and a sense of authenticity. You have to know what that core piece or pieces of the story are, where the story cannot be told without that. I encourage you, hold on to that. Know what that is. You don't necessarily have to tell all your partners what that is, but you have to know what is that piece that without this is not a story I'm interested in telling anymore. And then what parts of this are window dressing that I can engage in conversations with and be more flexible about. And being clear on what is absolutely necessary to tell the story with authenticity and integrity, and being clear on what I would like to have in the story is helping me get through this moment where people are literally speaking to me in Jedi Code. So what you're saying is, I need to add white characters. So what you're saying is, and not wanting to say it that way. And if it's a project where that absolutely just cannot happen, then it cannot happen at that particular moment with that particular lineup of people or whoever's in line. Maybe it will come back. But I have had success in always knowing what the core part of this story is and holding on to that and then being able to engage in the other stuff. And sometimes it means it can't happen right now. Look, I feel like about a year ago I wrote and developed at a very, very high level a script for a limited series that might be the best thing I've written in the last 10 years. From what people are telling me, what my team is telling me, and I can feel it's like this is, and when we put it together with the powerful auspices that were behind it, this was a go because it had started in 2022. By the time we got it ready to go out in late 23, 24, 25, different circumstances. Okay? And it's not going to happen right now. It's an expose about the Boston Police Department.
Time and place.
There's a lot to unpack there. And I did a lot of work, and I'm very, very proud of it. Do I think it can come back? I think the story is so good. I think eventually it can, but I had to accept not right now.
Do it independently.
Let's talk.
Just about that.
And so those are the things that, sometimes the answer is not yet.
And maintaining that integrity that you speak
And
of.
maintaining that integrity as much as you can, but also understanding, like I have also, in terms of how have I navigating this moment, I'm trying to, the partners that come to me or that I've partnered with, they have strong track records. And I feel like that's important because I need them advocating again in those rooms that I'm not necessarily a part of.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And now, Anthony, you're telling us a lot about the storyteller, the author, your mentees, but what about the audience now? Atif and Keisha, maybe you can speak to that based on your recent work. What models and approaches are actually working right now to get to these audiences, to get these projects made and financed and greenlit and go through all these processes? And where are creators actually finding these audiences that they need?
For me, I think we're in a time where financing, this is the question that everybody, I was talking to somebody yesterday and they're like, what's the panel about? And I said the title and they were like, yes, please tell us where to get money. And I wish I had like some clear-cut answer. There's a piggy bank in the back. But I think what is happening though is these models and the way things are getting financed. And I think this business is a hustle and you got to get creative. And I think the hybrid models are the ones that are working. So the traditional stuff is, take your stuff to a studio, pitch it. If they buy it, great, they make it. But if they don't let that be the end-all, be-all. There's pre-sales options. There's debt financing. I have a friend who has a movie here. He's been telling me about it for like 8 years. He took on debt, financed it that way. There's a reason why all the big guys are going overseas, talking to these sovereign wealth funds as well, right? I've spent some time in the Middle East, in Doha, and in Saudi, and had these. And so I would say pay attention to where there's hunger for this, and where there's an appetite to, invest in stories. And, and I don't think it's limited to film. I come from film. I've only done film, but I'm sort of getting my feet wet with TV now. And, we're seeing shows like Tires and so on. Another buddy of mine, shout out to Jim Cummings, is here with a series that he independently made. He shot 6 episodes on his own, and he's here with it. And, that's the hustle. So I don't know, maybe it's the guy, the 15-year-old me who's always had a problem with authority and just won't take no for an answer. But, and then there's also the private individuals. Like I always tell, I also spend time with up-and-coming filmmakers and writers. And, I tell them, like, where I've found the most success in terms of financing, especially for, maybe your first or second feature, is figure out what you're trying to say and go talk to your uncles and friends, and you don't know, there's been wealthy doctors who've written checks because the material connected with them on a personal level. So you never know where it comes from, but I will say you also need to be strategic about what you're doing, because chances are if this person's a wealthy businessman or a doctor or businesswoman, they know their stuff, and they're going to be able to see right through you if all you can talk about is your creative vision, but not your plan for execution in terms of a business, right? So.
And I'm going to answer that real quickly. I just introduced a filmmaker to a wealthy doctor I felt like there would be connection, so hopefully that will work for them. It wasn't something that we would have done, but I believed in that filmmaker, and I knew that wealthy individual was looking for stories about his connection and his culture to be told. So let's send him some good energy. Maybe that will, that will happen.
Sure.
But what I was going to say, which touches on that, is that the audience is there, and I think from my lens of where I work heavily in our verticals under our digital and with our marketing, and understanding what we do as a culture to know that, quite frankly, for us, I think from my perspective, if you build it, if Black people are going to come, right? If it's authentic, if it's fun, they're going to move that audience, and our audiences are going to show up for our content. So I just think when you're creating something and they want you to make it more whatever the language is in the room at that time, trust and know, serve your audience first and your core and the story and the authenticity, because they're out there and those stories want to be told, and find funders that find connectivity and find a way to help you tell that story. Now, the other thing from the other lens that I'm excited about, and the last 2 months, I would say in the last month, I've been having conversations with foundations and that are interested, and it's because in a moment of crises, and whatever crisis, we're in multiple moments of crisis, right? And so whatever it is, that you start to see people rise up. And hopefully you see that collective power I'm talking about rise up. So I'm seeing philanthropy, and I'm seeing them rise up, where this is like literally the third conversation I've had, and it happened here at Sundance as well, about how do we fund storytellers? How do we fund storytellers? We want to continue to beat that drumbeat. So I'm thinking there are going to be innovative ways that the financial community, whether it's philanthropic community, where it's individual donors, are going to start stepping up, where it's either that first seed of development to get it out, or to help them thrive through production, where they can have some sort of proof of concept where they can get and show that they are able to do this, because we know they can. They just need the opportunity, and they need funding and resources to do that. And so that's my perspective for that, is I truly believe the audience is there. I watch them, I see them, I'm in the comments, because that's the work we do, that they want to see this, to see those stories told, to see themselves represented, to see the authenticity and those who have the microphone to tell those stories. It's there. And now what I'm hoping is bubbling up is all these conversations and these funders that are eager to figure out the pathway to get there.
I just want to piggyback on that a little bit. Keisha, like in terms of audience, I think we're in this day and age now. If you look at like the big successes of the last few years, you find that we keep hearing that the movie star, persona is sort of on the decline, and it's not selling tickets, right? Or it's not making them money. I mean, who would have thought, even a few years ago, that Leonardo DiCaprio would be making TikToks to promote his film? But that said, you also see this gravitation towards the filmmakers themselves, right? People are showing up for the Nolans and the Kuglers, the Jordan Peels, right? They're creating their own audience and brand. So I'm looking around and I'm saying, like, 9 out of 10 people that approach me are usually writers or directors. And, I think we're in this day and age where with YouTube and podcasts and all of this, like, while you're trying to build your long form stuff, also build an audience that follows your brand. Because that creates leverage, and then, it's inherently built in. So if people are following you already for whatever you're doing, they're inherently going to watch what you have, right? So, and when you do make your first movie or your fifth movie, you will have people who are already fans of you that'll show up.
Absolutely, and I think we've all found that good people want to support good people doing good things, doing meaningful work. And even from a lawyer's perspective, the amount of financing agreements that I've written for the doctor, the lawyer, the architect, the engineer, that just really love this story or really love this filmmaker, or they're out there. You just have to let yourself be known, and it's out there, and it will happen. Segueing to things that we're all kind of talking about these days, these emerging technologies. AI is, our next door neighbor these days. Tamina, I'm gonna give this one to you. So how are emerging technologies like AI changing authorship and ownership and bargaining power in real time?
Well, I mean, for us, we are at this point we're really viewing AI as a tool and not a replacement for human creativity. I think we strongly feel that human creativity is the key to storytelling. Still, I mean, there's no denying that. So we're definitely looking at ways to make things more efficient. And so, like in my own day-to-day, which is not exactly what you're referring to, but in my own day-to-day, how can I make a deal faster? And so it's like, how can I do quicker research by having better data points at my fingertips? Like those kinds of things are right now. That's kind of how I'm trying to use AI or encourage my teams to use AI. But I think even in I think the big question mark, of course, is going to be how can it be used to make production more efficient, potentially, right? And, maybe cutting down on the time between seasons or things like that. But the thing is, of paramount importance, at least for us, is the human creativity aspect. And so we can't sacrifice that. So that's still, so yes, how do we make things more efficient, but still, have that power of storytelling in our content. It's still the key. So.
And it's really nice from a studio perspective to hear somebody from inside perspective to say human creativity still matters. And Anthony, even as a showrunner, creator, what is this like and how is it affecting writers' rooms? How is it affecting the lived impact? I know even as a lawyer, talent is coming to me and say, I don't want this AI clause in there. I don't want them to be able to just use my content endlessly. Right. So what does that lived impact look like?
Well, it's still in flux and still, I think, sort of happening now, sort of as we speak. There are rooms I have heard of that are using, Chat GPT 5.0 to proof their scripts, run it through 5.0, I hear is a phrase, I personally don't know anybody who has brought and embraced AI into their actual writing process, perhaps their research process, that I've certainly heard of. But, I for fun, just for fun, because I was like, what's up, for real? And so a pitch that I just went out with, I said, I went on ChatGPT for first time and I was like, cut this pitch for me. Tron, what they did to my pitch. I was like, if you don't get this bullshit out of here, I was like, it's like there was no way. I was like, what it spit back at me was insane. It was like, I can't pitch this. I was like, if this is where it's at, I think I got a few more years before, before I'm really concerned about this. That being said, we are in a worldwide, certainly countrywide, grappling with how universities are, for better or for worse, embracing AI, building it into their platforms. My kid's school, high school, I'm watching them grappling with it. And a lot of people are just dealing with it now from a point of how do we stop you from cheating? How do we go from this sort of punitive point of view about it to, okay, it's a tool that's here. How is it going to, be helpful to us? So I don't think it has transformed writers' rooms yet, except that I am hearing, and is this a combination of AI? Is this a combination of, the strike deal? It's a question. So I know a friend who just got a show picked up, and her studio is insisting that she can't hire more than 3 writers. Just won't move. Won't move. And she's like, no, I need more. Like, no, 3 plus you. We think you're good, and and if the budget is sort of, there are ways where you could get creative, with the budget, but if the budget is that tight, then there's only so much stretching of a budget that you can do to get what you need. And I sort of feel like the ethos of we need less human capital, labor, even though that's not I feel like that is sort of connected to, oh, you'll be able to figure it out somehow with this. So I do think, I don't want to dismiss it as a threat. I think it is. I just think that we have yet to see fully how it has transformed writers' rooms and TV production in particular. It's still a TBD.
Thank you, Anthony. That gave me a little hope because I've been a little bit worried about talent.
Well, and I'll say this. Now, I have a friend who works at Meta who I have breakfast with like once every 3 months, and it's like my way of like, I'm such an artsy fart, and I'm like, what's happening in the rest of the world? Like, tell me what's going on, you know? And he did just text me on the way here. He was like, I don't think y'all are replaceable. He did say that. He did say that, which is different from what he said a year ago. Because a year ago, he was like, oh, we're all moving towards a country of guaranteed minimum income because ain't nobody going to have no job. That's what he told me a year ago. This year, he's saying, not so fast.
We'll take it.
There's hope.
I know, there is. So speaking on that hope, we're talking about implications and changes and risk tolerance and leverage, but why does this unstable moment, Keisha, I'll start with you, create new opportunities for underrepresented storytellers to lead with specificity and ambition rather than just caution and dilution that we have been used to for so long?
Well, that's really a great question. I mean, I think that this moment, what people really still want is they want the truth, and they want good stories of what you told, and what you said earlier. And I think that right now, I'm going to use an example. Right now, we just did a documentary that was on Peacock, and it was High Horse, the Black Cowboy. And it's a 3-part docuseries about the erasure of the Black Cowboy. And so we're doing this, and we've been filming it for like 3 years, but we did it right now when people are erasing and currently tearing down, slave monuments and like just rewriting history. And I think people wanted it. And I think it's a need and it's an opportunity to continue to beat the drumbeat of these stories and to look for directors. And one of our directors, Sasha Jenkins, he passed during the time that we were making this documentary. But the amount of people who have stopped or texted or told me that we need to be continuously having these conversations, even in this backdrop that what we're in, is I think that is the momentum that is going to continue to go. To your point, what you said earlier, Anthony, just really resonated with me, is that it is difficult, and it is continuing to be difficult right now. And what we're seeing is the risk. We might not be having marginalized voices. We might be some of the things that people are excited for are trying to put trauma first and not necessarily joy first, and those things. But those stories are still needed to be told, and there are opportunities, and the audience and the market is there for them to be told. And what we need to continue to do is press our peers, our peers in production companies, peers and executives who are also being, decreased at some degree as well, to continue to look for those and to continue to find ways to bring those pathways in. And so, that is the thing that is giving me the hope, because in continuous chaos, there is an opportunity for us to be able to thrive. And it's going to be harder. It's going to take longer. It's going to be less resources. But I fundamentally believe that we are still creating that space, and I say that, and the reason why I tip my hat to Peacock at that moment is because in where I'm seeing that language gets changed. We can't say, it's not being as upfront it was from probably, I started to see this in 23. I really started to see at 23 that things are changing. We now it's kind of everyone, all, not just specifically we want black women, we want gay men, it really became softened. And in that still place, we were able to say things about erasure, say things about race, say things about those who've been killed and marginalized like the word cowboy. The cowboy was an enslaved black man. You weren't calling white men boys in the 1800s, right? And the fact that we were still able to say that, put marketing money around it, and push out in 2025 and 26 gave me a glimpse of hope that it might not be as many as we thought it was going to be in 2020, but there are still some that are going to be able to push through.
And Atif, can you tell us about, just on the ground, an actual project or production experience that you had where that sort of representation choices made a huge difference to the actual project?
Yeah, I made a movie called The Last Stop in Yuma County. Came out last year, and yeah, so when the script came to me, the writer-director's like a really good friend of mine. I read it, and I also am cognizant of the fact that he has a specific worldview. He's white. And I read it, and I looked at his cast wish list, and everybody was white. And I read it, and I was like, hey, this character, like, the way I read it, seems Native American to me. Like, Pete could be Native American. And he made that change, and we ended up casting John Proudstar. And there was another character who we ended up casting an African-American actor. He wasn't a name, hadn't really done anything. And in the first week, he was, not great. It was not working. And I pulled the director aside, and I was like, hey, we need to do something about this. And everybody knew that it wasn't working. And he was like, no, I'll make it work in the edit. And I was like, no, you don't understand. We have, in this cast of 14 people, 2 people of color, and I'm not going to let one of them be the weakest link. So, and we were butting heads. He's like, we've already shot him. We're a week in. So I made some calls and found myself on a FaceTime with Faison Love, who's, in his 50s. He hadn't shaved. The character was in his 70s. And I asked him, I was like, read the script and tell me what you think. So he read it. He lives in Atlanta. And he's like, I'm down. So I had to go back to the director, and I still remember this. We were in between takes, and we had, because he's a friend of mine and we have that mutual respect and trust, it wasn't a boxing match, but it did get heated. But it was a dance. And at one point, I think, because I'm a pain in the ass, I think he just got tired of saying no, and he literally just looked at me right before we went for a take, and he was just like, all right, it's on you, and walked away. And so I got Faison on a plane in 24 hours, brought him out. I called a friend who's a world-class makeup artist. She came in the next day. We aged him to look the part. And when the movie came out, I sent this to some of my mentors in the business who I really respect. And one of the first compliments was like, Faison's the best part of this movie. So I think, but also trusting yourself and having that instinct, but making sure that, for me, especially as a producer, I think that director-producer relationship is so important. And at the end of the day, my job is to empower them and help them see their vision through. But I also know what's important to me and know when to sort of stand my ground when it makes sense and it serves the narrative. So, yeah.
Thank you, Atif. And I know we're running out of time on the questions, but Tamina, can I ask you this question? From your specific vantage point, what practical steps should the sector be taking right now to position creators, executives, and companies for sustainability in an industry that's in constant flux, that's in the turmoil, that goes up and down, that ebbs and flows, like Anthony said?
Yeah, I think the entertainment business has been constantly evolving. I know that it feels like this time of flux is different from any other, but I do think that is probably could be said when cable came about. And, we've been through some of these immense times of change. And I think the important thing is, for me, in what I do, and I'm just like on the business affairs side, for me, my business is all about relationships, and that is very much the same for everybody here, more so probably for them, but I know that's key for me too, is to have good, I can't tell you how many times I've ended up closing a deal after I had lunch with the agent, that it's just, that helped so much. So I think building those strong relationships is something that it's not anything new, that I'm not saying anything new, but it does still need to be the focus for moving forward in this time of change, and being creative in every aspect. Like in my deal making, we're always thinking about. I know I touched on this before, but how to adapt to the changing business models, the changing, Generation Alpha consuming content in a very different way from, Gen X here, like just things like that. So being flexible and adapting, but also the relationship, building is always important in these times.
Absolutely, and what I'm hearing is, yes, it's unstable, but we can adapt with flexibility and trust and supporting one another and integrity and all those things that you have mentioned. So thank you all for that. I know we have to turn it over to questions, so who has questions? Anybody? Yes, Hannah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Do I really need a mic? I'm Sue's sister. Thank you all very much for coming and expressing and sharing your stories with us. And Mr. Sparks, there are some things that you were talking about that really struck me from a corporate perspective about coming up with the ideas, really pitching it to someone, and then not being at the table when they're talking about something that you created, and there's risk. And I'm sure each one of you can tell us a story about that. I could tell you that from a healthcare perspective, in the industry that I work in. How do you get around, or anyone can answer this question, but it's what you were talking about that really just made me scratch my head thinking, yeah, this happens almost in every industry. How do you represent your own work and take credit for it when you're not at the table? How do you get a sponsor? Because in the corporate world, in healthcare, the best way to get ahead is to get a sponsor. So in other words, someone inside the company has their eye out for you, making sure that you're eligible for promotions, that you're being considered. And I've seen people that didn't have these sponsors or mentors or whatever just kind of do the same thing or leave companies thinking that, yeah, I'll make $10,000 somewhere else. I've seen this happen to people. What is your recommendation? Anyone can answer this, but what is your recommendation for getting a sponsor or mentor in your industry, in your field, where it's so cutthroat and everybody's really looking for the next big Oscar-nominated or Emmy-nominated or whatever award?
Well, I just want to clarify, your question is about. Is it about mentorship? Is it about
It's really
who your partners are,
Yeah,
perhaps
so
on the producing side, or
just how do you make sure that you have someone who has your back when you are not represented at the table for ideas that
Sure.
you came up with?
Allyship too, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think first of all, that is always a concern and an agenda and on your wish list when you're getting ready to work with people. In TV in particular, which is definitely by definition a collaboration business, after the number of years I've been able to be in the business, I am now at a point where the people who either come to me with ideas or who I partner with an idea, they tend to have a track record. I am trying to be a little bit more judicious about who I say yes to because of what you're asking, okay? So if I have a project at Lionsgate and the producer who wants me to create a show and I'm sparking to the material is a producer who just did 5 seasons of a show at Lionsgate, I'm expecting that producer, once I've done my job, to do his or hers, which means they're going to have conversations. I don't like that they do, but they're going to have conversations without me. And if it's about getting the green light, and if it's about getting the whatever it is, or them to cut the check for the development or whatever it is, that is where I'm expecting you to step up and do it. Because I actually don't know that I need you that much creatively. I want to hear what you have to say creatively, because it's another set of eyes. But where I'm really leaning on you is when you're happy with the creative and I'm happy with the creative, can you now go and represent me in this project to allay their fears about whatever it is, right? Because you have a track record. That, to me, is where they earn their money. as far as like a mentor and things like that, I think we're all always like, nobody makes it alone. Like nobody makes it alone. Nobody makes it alone. You know, you were just, out of just talking about, you reference, mentors, and I don't think people always think of producers as having mentors, but
No, we need it.
yeah, but it's necessary. Creative executives, I'm certainly we all do, right? And so, and the way that those come, people get their mentors in a lot of different ways. Most of mine have come more organically. I've rarely gone up to someone and said, "Hey, will you mentor me?" It's just been, I found myself working for a showrunner who really liked how hard I was working when I was first coming up. And she turned into, my second job, showrunner, turned into the person who I believe turned me from just a writer, which is great, but into being, a writer-producer for TV and on the path to being a showrunner. Like, I give her all the credit, What that meant was I was sometimes working 20 hours a day. So, it was beneficial to her because I was like a workhorse, like couldn't be stopped. But what I got in return was someone who would tell me, okay, who would let me sit in a meeting with her and an executive and say, okay, here's what was real. You think this is what was happening? Here's what was really happening. Because there's always the agenda on the thing, and then there's one that's like underneath, right? Which you may or may not know about depending on your positionality in that meeting, right? So, always looking for, who those mentors are going to be. I think no matter what level, you are. John Wells, sometimes, big guy John Wells, right? He's been around forever, super, successful. He occasionally calls showrunners together to go over our budget practices, okay? And I don't take I run shows and I'm the first one there on that Saturday morning, or he's going to walk us through how you deal with budget challenges as a showrunner. And he's doing that because he knows that's important in order to maintain the authority of showrunners, okay? That we be able to be fluent both in the creative and to be fluent, to a degree at least, in those financial conversations as well.
Can I ask a question? Do you think, when I'm listening to what you're saying and what everyone said, it seems like it's this foundation of trust that in this flux that we have to build. I trust you to do your job. I trust you, your producer, director, have this hard conversation in our relationship. And the agents. I mean, that's the one thing listening to what part of your question, and I think it's hard. And that is one of the things that this business is built on relationships. I mean, it really is. And that trust, the trust to be honest with me and have the hard conversation and deliver that I sometimes seem not having.
And also, and like from a writer, creator, showrunner point of view, when you are partnering with producers, quote unquote, non-writing producers, that trust has to be, where I've seen it go wrong is when we allow, like I once worked with a line producer who I was like, clearly line producing is not enough for you, clearly. Because why am I having a power battle with you? You're not going to get up in this writer's room and come up with a season's worth of scripts. So why are we in a power battle? There shouldn't be that, right? There should be trust that if you're going to step in, you really feel it's for the good of the project, and you're trying to expand my point of view at that moment, right? As the person, as I guess this was a conversation with your director, as opposed to I'm taking over the film. Like when you start getting into that, or the show, you're in a bad situation. That you're in a bad situation. So trust that the thing is what everybody is working towards, making a success. And if you're the creator or showrunner, hoping that you have producers who, whatever they're doing behind the scenes, they're trying to make it easier for you, because really showrunning is an impossible job, right? And that literally puts people in the grave early, so.
I just want to add to the topic of mentorship specifically, and I'm speaking directly as a Muslim in the Muslim house at Sundance. Like, I think our community is so fractured in terms of like mentorship or just opening door. I think for so long we had no representation, and there was this scarcity mindset, and that when like the first few people sort of like were able to like were let in through the door, they were so excited they kicked it wide open but slammed it on the people behind them. And I think we need to pay special attention to, you know, holding that door open for everyone who's working their way up towards and collaborating with one another. You know, I think we'd be a lot further as a community in getting our stories told. As a business, we would have a lot more influence and not sort of, you know, we all the panels today, like Palestine has come up, like, you know, I think like we wouldn't be relying on blurry like Twitter and Instagram videos to tell that story. And so I think it's real important. I was here last year and I had great conversations and meetings with people, you know, here at the Muslim House and outside, exchanged a few emails, and, you know, things were looking great, and then it's just darkness. And I get everybody's busy, but there's Academy Award winning producers who are in town for the Oscars who are taking time to have a coffee with me, right? Who are mentors. So I don't think there's an excuse, and I think we need to sort of hold our own feet to the fire and look at ourselves and you know, like I can't take on every project that's come to me, but I always try to find a way, like, hey, let me just jump on a 30-minute Zoom with you, and if I can save you like 6 months of headache just based on, you know, imparting some knowledge based on one of my experiences, great. I hope it helps you. If I can open a door for you if it's appropriate, great. I hope that helps. But granted, all that said, you know, the work has to be of a certain caliber. I'm not gonna like make introductions if I don't feel like it's there, but I think one way or another we need to point each other in the right direction. Otherwise, like, we're just gonna be stuck in this sort of place that we've been in.
I mean, I think just to jump off that really quickly, I think we all know as people who are marginalized and fighting for our stories to be out there that we have to do our work. Like, that's like that's like default, right? Like, you have to have done your work to be able to, so that you are comfortable, I am comfortable, you are comfortable walking someone into a room, even if they have less experience, as we all start out with less experience. That's the way it works. And then you have to get more. But if you've done all that you can so that that person can walk in, you know, fully endorsing you as someone who is worthy of being paid attention to in their project, you know, that is the thing. Look, I'm trying to get to the Negro artist section of heaven, and I believe that at the pearly gates, that when they say, we gave you opportunity, and what did you do with that? I do not believe my answer can be, I bought a great pair of shoes. So when you talk about a scarcity mindset, it's when it's, sorry, I feel myself getting up on a thing, you know, because I have, in my own community, I have seen that it infuriates me on a level that I just don't even want to go into right now, because we're not here, any of us, if there wasn't someone who said, let me make that call for you, or I can't make that call for you because of XYZ, but let me like tell you what you need to do to prepare, you know. And so we have to operate with, there's me here in the present and I'm trying to do my thing and keep my thing going, but I'm not going to be here always. And the stories that we want to tell should outlive us. So there has to be, back to the baton, there has to be someone who I think is worthy and that I can invest in. And so I am a product of teachers. You know, I love teachers, both official teachers and unofficial teachers. And so I truly believe that part of the job of being creative and an artist is that at some point you are teaching, mentoring, something.
And thank you. And with that baton and holding that baton back and holding those doors open, you guys have shown us where that turmoil isn't so scary after all, that there is hope. And I was talking to Keisha and Omar Regan about James Baldwin, and he said, we can't afford despair. We can't tell the children not to hope. And I think we gotta all share that and hold that as close to heart as possible. So thank you all for this brilliant panel. Thank you all for being here, and thank you again to Impact Hollywood Bureau of Muslim Health.